It's so noisy.
Hi, Lisa. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh.
Sorry, Lisa, can you hear me? I can't hear anybody. I can hear some music.
Okay, can you hear me?
Oh, there you go. Okay.
I'm playing the music, so that's probably the problem.
Oh, okay.
But I can hear you. You sound great.
We're just waiting for the meeting to fill up, and we're getting pretty close here.
We are. It's pretty exciting to have 150 people sign up. It's great.
Exciting and terrifying. Thankfully, it's not in person.
Yeah.
So I just feel like I'm just talking into an abyss right now.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Jackson?
Can you people hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just a participant, but for some reason I can see you guys. So should I turn off my video?
It's totally up to you.
Yeah, the mute will be mandatory, video optional.
I hope you say that to your next
Hey, Craig, can you hear me okay?
You're pretty quiet.
All right. Is this the standard that we're talking about? Has it been revised since surfaces?
Sorry, can you repeat yourself?
Okay, the DCOF standard was revised, and the revision was announced during surfaces, which was like, or is it coming up?
It's coming up. Surfaces is next week. I'm leaving tomorrow for Las Vegas.
Okay, so this isn't going to reflect the what's coming out next week.
I didn't submit any slides. I was just asked to participate, but I do have the actual draft, the pre-publication draft, which I got permission from Town Council to give to anybody who wants to have it after the presentation today. So okay. It's good to go. There's nothing. Nothing to be changed on it. But I've been involved in the revisions, and it has warped a little bit over the last few drafts, but they finally got it all set. So
Cool.
That'd be me for sure. Super appreciate it.
yeah.
Okay, folks,
it-
we're gonna get this meeting underway. I just wanted to welcome everybody. We've got quite a few TTMAC people on here. Our staff, Violetta and Lisa, a lot of board of directors, about 7, and we've also got past presidents and past board of directors and committee people. Thank you for all attending and all your efforts. We're going to turn it over to Barb, who is our chairperson on the and our board of director for TTMAC, is our host, and she's introducing our speakers. Take it away, Barb.
You're muted, Barb.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, there we go. Wow, what a year. It continues. Welcome everyone to our first TTMAC Tech Talk of 2022. Try and say that 4 times fast. So today we will be discussing the ups and downs of slip and fall and of the importance of DCOF testing. Also, we will be updating you with some new ANSI standards. As many of you know, we have moved from a COF, coefficient of friction test, which was a static test, to a DCOF, a dynamic test. Industry standards and specification information can be found on our TTMAC website, where manuals are also available for purchase. The BOT 3000 is a calibrated turbometer, which simply put measures the slip resistance. The BOT 3000 allows a non-biased calibrated test to be done to determine if your floor meets the proper coefficient of friction. Lisa is going to play a short video of the BOT 3000 now. Thank you, Lisa. Now, many manufacturers have testing available for tile, but in situations where you need additional testing or on-site testing, TTMAC can be hired to do this for you. A need for accurate testing has become more apparent as tile services get larger and larger. Many of you remember that many of the tiles started off 6x6 and 8x8. When we first got 12x12s, those seemed large. Now 12x24 is considered a standard. Technology has come a long way, and the ability for the BOT 3000 to print out a test with accuracy is one of these benefits and must be used by a trained technician. Now, today we have with us Violetta Ivanescu, our general manager of TTMAC, who is also the person who coordinates the test and will answer any questions regarding that. We have Dale Kempster from Schluter Systems, our tile guru, who will be speaking to new ANSI standards. And our keynote speaker, Jackson Doyle. Now, Jackson Doyle is an associate at Harper Gray Attorneys. He has practiced at the firm since 2016. He practices in health law and construction law groups, where he assists clients with a variety of issues relating to professional liability. Jackson has represented clients in slip and fall claims, where tile specification has been one of the key issues. Jackson will discuss these issues and identify some common pitfalls. We look forward to your insights, Jackson. I would like to thank Lisa Weir for coordinating this Tech Talk, and please direct all your questions through her. Thank you, gentlemen, for giving of your time to speak. And of course, a big thank you to everyone else for attending. Wishing you all the very best in 2022. Jackson, over to you.
Thank you, Barb, and thanks to Lisa for organizing this, and Owen Bird, who actually asked me to speak a long time ago, and I guess we just got around to organizing it now. But it's unfortunate we have to do these things virtual. Hopefully we get back to a time where we can do these things together. As Barb said, I'm an associate at Harper Gray. I've been here since 2016. I handle all sorts of files relating to complaints to regulatory and licensing bodies, as well as civil litigation. I was first introduced to the TTMAC through Owen because we were looking to retain an expert to comment or provide an opinion on the dynamic coefficients of friction for a tile that a poor lady slipped and fell on. So that's how I initially got involved in this, and learned a lot about dynamic coefficients of friction. That said, I'm not an expert, and I'm sure all of you will know much more than me about this topic. So if you have any questions, it's probably likely I'm not going to know the answer, but I'll do my best. You can always send an email to Lisa, and I'm happy to respond to anybody through that as well. There'll be an opportunity at the end to ask any questions if you'd like as well. I'm going to share my screen. I think I can do that. And I'll put up some, there, see if this works. Okay. Hopefully you can all see this presentation. So before we get into it, I thought I would just make a couple of qualifying remarks because I'm based in BC. I only really practice in BC law. So I don't know much about other jurisdictions, to be honest with you. But I will refer to some cases which are from other provinces in Canada because the principles are very similar. I'll be often saying tile, and I mean no disrespect to terrazzo and marble. I appreciate those are excellent products, but tile is just easier to say. And so as I prepared this presentation, I thought it might not be overly relevant for you, but there's probably some things that you can take for your own personal interest. But I think there's also a lot of value add that you can take to your clients when you're working with them and figuring out what their risk might be and how they might mitigate their risk when considering tiles for a certain project. So I thought it'd be helpful to start with just sort of a basic overview as to what the mechanics of a legal claim might look like involving a slip and fall, but also in claims where there's allegations of a defective product or that a product wasn't properly installed or wasn't suitable for the application. So the first thing you need is some sort of injury, loss, or damage. The common example is a slip and fall or a defective product. I'll probably use those two as the prime examples as we go through this presentation. The second thing you need, obviously, is a lawsuit. So a legal claim. So if a plaintiff were to fall, injure themselves, they would try and identify parties that would be responsible for their injury, loss, or damage. Lawyers have different practices. Some apply more of a shotgun approach where they just name everybody and anybody who ever touched the project. Obviously, that is just a huge pain in the butt, but typically they include owners and occupiers, entities who are involved in the design construction of the project, any subcontractors possibly. I put sale, unlikely going to be involved. Someone who sells a project is going to be involved. But if you're involved in the production of a project or product that might be used on the project, you may be included in that as well too. There's also an opportunity, if you're not a direct defendant, there's an opportunity for defendants to actually identify parties who they think might be responsible for the actual deficiency or slip and fall in this case, and they could also third party you in. So even if you're not named, you still might not be out of the clear yet, and you might still be named. I use slip and fall as an example. There's also cases where strata corporations will sue really anybody who's involved in the design and construction of a project. And I'll get into a more detailed example as we work through the slides. But the next step, so once you have a claim, you need to ascertain information in all the relevant documents relating to that claim. So this is a discovery process. The first stage is really exchange of documents. So in large construction projects, this can be hundreds of thousands of documents. If you think about everything from contract documents, schedules for architects, there's design drawings, invoices, emails, pictures, change orders, approvals, as-built drawings, everything usually gets disclosed through that process. It takes a long time to go through them and figure out whether they're relevant or not, and how they relate to the project. So often we start by figuring out what the chronology of the project is and figure out what documents relate to what and how they fit into the bigger picture. There's rarely that smoking gun or key document that says, hey, I was aware that this tile was inappropriately selected and we still went ahead with it and installed it regardless. That would be nice, that would be ideal. But I think if that happened, lawyers would have no longer have much work. Examination for discovery, I won't talk about it too much, but really it's just an opportunity for the parties to sit down and ask the lawyers, ask the parties questions about the claim and what they say happened. The next step, and this is what I referenced earlier, is experts. They're usually very important in complex cases where a judge or the other parties don't have the technical expertise to really understand the issues in the claim. So we need experts. We rely heavily on experts to really inform our assessment of the claim, but also to assist the judge or jury if we ever have juries again. So experts are critical. They're the ones, such as yourselves, with the expertise to really help us and understand the issues. With dynamic coefficients of friction in particular, I think they're critical because it's not something a judge can just really take judicial notice of. They need to have these concepts explained to them so they understand what dynamic coefficient is, number one, what's suitable, and how that impacts the liability for the parties. Mediation settlement, very common in a lot of claims. I don't want to talk about it too much, but anyway, it can be really anywhere throughout this whole process, but I put it there because it made the most sense to me. And then trial, if you can't resolve your disputes, then you're probably going to end up in trial, where we'll need all those other stages. So the documents, the examination for discovery evidence, expert reports, all those things are critical for a trial. I wanted to say something about claims and just generally they should be completely avoided at all costs, even though it is a large part of what I do. They're incredibly expensive. They're time consuming, not only for me, but for yourselves. And ultimately, I think they don't really result in any particular party being overly satisfied with the outcome, because there's always some sort of resolution by compromise. I say it's expensive there, and you may think, well, our risk is low, that's fine, or we have insurance, and yeah, most people do have insurance that would cover them, but then you're responsible for paying deductibles and whether your premiums go up, and those types of considerations that you have to pay. If you don't have insurance, then you're thinking, am I going to pay out of pocket for something like this? And it gets incredibly expensive. And I think the more important part is probably your time, the amount of time it would take to get your documents, talk to the lawyers, involve yourself in settlement discussions, maybe attend an examination for discovery. Those things take a long time, and I'm sure you have other things that you'd rather be doing with your time. So mitigating risk, I hope to focus on that today, and why it's important and what members of the TTMAC might think about it. And my general sense is that members of the TTMAC are probably exposed to very little risk when dealing with you're getting involved in the sale and distribution of tile. And so it led me to the question is, well, why do I care? And as I said earlier, there's potential risk. I mean, depending on the lawyer and depending on the nature of the claim, they may want you just to name everybody. Anyone whose name was in any type of document, any invoice, any receipt, anything like that, they may just name you. Unfortunately, there's nothing that prohibits people from doing that. Perhaps more importantly for today, I think there's a real value add to your clients, whether it's the actual manufacturers and producers of the tile, or to people who are purchasing your tile. And then finally, I guess you could always use this for your personal use. So adding value to your client, as I was thinking about this, I think when you're probably talking to your client, I'm sure you do a lot of these things, but things that you'll want to discuss and which will become more clear as we go through some of the cases and what was important to them in those cases is the use of the product. What's it being used for? Is it heavily trafficked? Is it exterior? I've noted a couple here. Is it going to be exposed to the elements? Is it covered or uncovered? Even if it is covered, is it going to have exposure to water, snow, salt that might be put on the product? Are there going to be oils, fats, cleaning products? Is it in a commercial kitchen? Are there going to be slopes to the application? And as I'll talk about in a minute, that was one of the issues that Owen was considering for us, was that these tiles were placed on a mild slope, but I think that became important at the end of the day. Are there stairs involved? What type of finish to the product is there? What grout is being used? And in some cases, I don't know how common this would be, but I suppose they could use tile in the exterior buildings as well too. And you might want to consider that and whether that might impact the overall building envelope. So I think when you are having these discussions with your clients, these are important questions to ask, or at least consider. I'm sure all of you do this anyway. So I think that's the reason why we're here, I guess, is to discuss DCOF. But when I initially was digging my teeth into the slip resistance of a tile, I got completely lost. And this is why we ended up talking to Owen about how do you measure slip resistance of a tile. When I first researched it, it seemed like there was a couple methods, and things have evolved over the years. And I guess in other jurisdictions, they use different types of ways to measure slip resistance of tiles. To my mind, I don't really care which method is used, as long as there's a universal standard that everyone can objectively determine whether the tile meets that standard or not. I was thinking about an analogy, and I suppose it's like speed limits and having one in kilometers an hour and one in miles an hour. It doesn't really matter which one you use, although one makes much more sense. It's really determining how you can objectively assess whether someone was going above what is regulated or not. So same thing, to my mind, applies in slip resistance. But as I was going through it, I thought I may as well hopefully touch on some of the different methods and probably why dynamic coefficient is the preferred method at this stage. So I've listed them all. Their standard SCOF is static coefficient of friction. There's an R rating. There's different numbers and acronyms for all these different slip resistance. But I'll go through them and see which ones might be more applicable and why you might use some in certain circumstances. That said, I think DCOF is probably the best way to go about it. But R ratings seem to be common, and I suppose it's somewhat helpful. But anyway, it's R9 is less than 10%. 10 degrees slope would give you minimal friction, and then it works up from there. 10 degrees to 19 degrees slope, and 19 to 27 degrees slope, 27 to 35, and then R13 at the very end is more than 35 degrees, which would have very high levels of friction.
Just to let you know, Jackson, that's commonly called the German ramp test. It's actually part of, it's a DIN, and it's called the German ramp test. And we do recognize that in our 093,000 manual as an alternative test to the, the DCOF for 326.3.
There we go. Okay. So anyway, yeah, whatever was just said, I would take that as gospel. But yeah, there are all sorts of different numbers there too. I didn't cite all of them, but here's a rating A to C for different slopes. The pendulum skid test for different types of ratings. I guess they're using a pendulum to determine the skid resistance of these tiles, or really probably any surface. And then DCOF. So from what I understood of it, it is kind of the leading way to measure how slippery a surface is. DCOF, I think, is more or less defined as a measurement to determine how much friction there is on floors when they're walked upon. So dynamic as opposed to static means dynamic is something is moving, static is something is not moving. And the ratio, I'm terrible at math, and I'm not gonna profess to know anything about it or get into it in any great detail. But it's calculated by taking the force that's necessary to keep a surface already in motion sliding over another surface divided by the weight of an object or normal force. So that machine that was just shown is does that for you. And I'll touch on that in a little bit, but the typical ranges from what I've seen are around 0.4 to 0.65, and the greater the number, the more slip resistant a surface is going to be. And we'll get into what that means for different applications. So I put this in because I looked at it and I just thought, this is insane. I don't understand any of this. And if you do, congratulations, but I don't know the technical aspects of it. All I know is something more along these lines, which is if you have certain areas, then the DCOF is going to give you a measurement that will allow you to determine which product might be suitable for that type of potential slip hazard or area. So in dry and level areas, such as an interior public walkway, contaminant free, so not like a commercial kitchen or anything like that. We're thinking like an interior hallway or retail store. Really, I think any DCOF is perfectly suitable. If it's a wet and level interior surface, so public areas, foyer of a hotel, I think, is a really good example where people might be coming in with maybe some wet shoes or an umbrella that might drip. You're going to want a bit more of a dynamic coefficient of friction, and they say equal or greater to 0.42. Exterior use, this is constant water. That should say with light or limited footwear. So if someone's barefoot, this is public showers, swimming pool decks, it really elevates up, and you're going to want greater or equal to 0.6 for your maximum DCOF. Again, pool areas exposed to water, but relatively maintained, same thing, 0.06. And then areas with oil, so commercial kitchens, automotive fluids that might be present, deep frying, if there's splatter, grill equipment, you're going to want, again, a very high DCOF of 0.06 or greater. And then ramps, so incline areas or ramps, which we'll touch on, stairs, stair treads, and nosing. You'll want quite a high DCOF just to provide that additional grip when people are walking around. So as the video showed, and as Barb mentioned, TTMAC offers this testing. I didn't think about including a video of the machine, but it's the AccuTest. It's a BOT 3000E. It's a calibrated testing device. It's, from what I understand, quite helpful because it's portable. And so if you needed to come and have something tested on site, you can have that done. You don't have to go or take a tile sample and go there. It's actually would be quite helpful from my perspective, because if the tile's still installed, you don't have to pull out those specific tiles, replace them, send them off for testing. You could just have the machine come and give you the dynamic coefficient of friction. So it's actually probably going to be quite helpful, I imagine, in lawsuits relating to the slipperiness of tiles. And that, as I'll talk about in a minute, one of the cases seemed to be the issue, is that it wasn't the exact tile that was installed that was tested. It was a different tile, and the judge cast some doubt on that. I struggled to follow specifications, and I'll show you another one in detail, but I thought it might be worthwhile to mention whether it needs to be on specifications, and if it's always on specification sheets. And okay, sorry, I'm just reading some of the questions. I'll just maybe address these at the end if I can.
No, Jackson, Lisa will monitor that. And
Okay.
Yeah, so folks, if you can send your questions to Lisa directly, that'd be great.
Okay. But you can send them in the chat. I'd like to know. I can always copy them and then I can research them on my own free time. Yeah, so specification sheets. Obviously, you get a lot of these, I expect. Does it need to be in there, DCOF information? I suppose it doesn't need to be, depending on what the tile is being manufactured for. This one I just pulled, and I thought it was a bit interesting because it didn't have any information about DCOF or any slip resistance at all. It had water absorption and stain resistance, and then I realized that, well, they're not recommending that you install it on a floor, so it's only just a wall installation. So I suppose just be careful of that and think about where it's being recommended for installation. And if it is floor, then you're going to probably want something a little more detailed, like this. And I unfortunately had to cut one off at the bottom, but this is a spec sheet that I pulled from actually a tile that was in question in one of the claims. And this is why we had to retain Owen, frankly, is because I had no idea what the leading way it was to determine slip resistance. You have slip resistance, dynamic friction coefficient, coefficient of friction, dynamic coefficient of friction, water pendulum test. I think that's AUS for Australia. So I grappled with this and really couldn't figure it out. And then they have different ratings for different products as well too, which need to be careful of. So it sounds like there's tons of products on the market. Obviously you can't commit that to memory, so these specifications seemingly would come in extremely handy. Other specifications, I suppose there's, again, this came up in our claim, was how is that product being advertised? This tile, there's obviously around a pool deck, it looks like there's two different tiles. They could be the same tile, just different colors. But that would lead you to believe that perhaps it has a higher dynamic coefficient of friction, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So I would just be cautious about that and make sure you do read those specifications to make sure that what's being advertised in pictures can actually be implemented in the real world based on what the company is representing. Now, some of the dry stuff, I thought it would be helpful just to provide some cases as to slip and falls, and also what judges consider and what experts have said about dynamic coefficients of friction and what weight the judges gave those. And you might see a trend there. A couple of the claims here ended up getting dismissed because of they just found that for a number of reasons, that the standard of care was met and that the owner occupier was doing everything they could to prevent that fall. It just happens, and they can't expect a standard of perfection. But it happens, and people get sued, and it's nice to know what to look out for and how you might try and mitigate your risk based on what some of the comments in these cases have said. So this one is Tondat and Hudson Bay Company. It's an Ontario decision from 2017. a lady entered a Bay department store and she slipped and fell. There was like a black mat, I guess, initially when you enter the store, and then beyond that was just a tiled floor. And so when she stepped off the black mat, she slipped and fell. It was drizzly or wet outside, and I suppose some of the residual water tracked onto the floor. She slipped, fell back, and hurt herself. So she ended up noticing, because there's evidence that she noticed the water on the tile, because when she fell, her clothes became a bit saturated. She sued Bay, the owners of the property, and the property management company who had hired cleaners. She didn't sue anybody else involved in the actual design or installation of the tiles for whatever reason, which can happen. Because I guess ultimately she probably thought it was the occupier's liability and the responsibility of the property management company to hire people who would clean the floors on a regular basis. So the issue in that case was whether the tile was appropriate and whether the cleaning company came and cleared the floors from water on a regular basis, enough to at least make the place not a constant hazard. The defendant retained an expert in neuromechanics who tested the tile. In this case, it was only noted to be a coefficient of friction, not a dynamic coefficient of friction. As I said, I think as long as the court has some information as to what or how to measure slipperiness, I don't know if they'll necessarily be too concerned whether it's a coefficient of friction or dynamic coefficient of friction. Nonetheless, the tiles were tested, and the expert found that the coefficient of friction was 0.43 in dry static conditions and 0.74 when wet and static, but 0.51 under wet and dynamic conditions. It didn't make a ton of sense to me. I don't know if that it is consistent with the DCOF scale, but anyway, the judge found that the expert's opinion didn't overcome the fact that the floor was wet and that the cleaning company didn't clean it up reasonably well. The judge was also skeptical that the expert just focused on the coefficient of friction of the tile specifically, and when it might be wet or in dry conditions. Didn't factor in such things as footwear, what people are wearing, whether there might be other substances on the floor, such as if the cleaning company is coming and using any solutions, or I saw one of the comments of whether they're scraping anything and how that might impact the tile coefficient of friction, or any other variables. So it's helpful, and again, that's why I think the portable device, if we're ever in a situation like this, would be really handy, so you wouldn't have to rip up that specific tile or tiles and then test all of them. In the end, the plaintiff was successful, but as you'll see in these other cases, the claims were dismissed and the plaintiffs were not successful. So this was a more recent case from Ontario, Karen and Amers Realty Corporation. This was a lady, I believe she was a lawyer for the Department of Justice. She slipped on a floor in the kitchenette at an employer's office. There was a leaking sink underneath. There's a hot water leak, and so I guess when she was having lunch one day, she slipped on the water and really hurt herself. In Ontario, they actually assert how much they want to claim for. We don't do that in BC. And I think she actually sought over $2 million in damages, which seems extremely high. So that really the facts of the case, they found that, so there was an interior surface, it was level, and it was usually dry. The defense expert assessed the tile and found that the floor was in wet dynamic coefficient of friction fell within an acceptable range. That acceptable range was, they said 0.37 was the average measurement, with 0.30 to 0.42 considered acceptable. Again, I suppose that's right in based on the DCOF chart on a level dry interior application. And so that fell within the acceptable range. And the court agreed with that and found that the expert opinion provided sufficient, or found that the tile provided sufficient friction for normal use. And that there was a very limited amount of evidence that suggested that the presence of water on the floor rendered the floor unsafe. So I don't want to comment on what our lawyer did, but maybe they didn't have enough evidence on that particular issue, and the court found against them. So in the end, they found that the defendants met the standard expected of them, that they were providing a reasonably safe floor, and that the tile that was installed was within the reasonably accepted range. So they ended up dismissing the claim. Again, I think the court noted there that you can't impose a standard of perfection on defendants. You can't expect that they're going to have someone standing by a sink that may or may not leak and constantly mop up any messes. That's just too onerous on a landlord. So I think that was also a key reason as to why they dismissed the claim. The last one, and I appreciate this is getting a bit maybe dry and repetitive, but this was a slip and fall in a Royal Bank of Canada in Nova Scotia. So the patron entered the foyer at an RBC to use an ATM, slipped and fell backwards. There was sign of wetness from other patrons entering the premises. So when they walked in, they would just track water in on their shoes or umbrellas or jackets or wherever. There's no evidence of cleaning. So unlike the first case, there was an expert that commented on the coefficient friction. But in this one, this is the one where they tested different tiles than those that were installed at the premises. So I think it was challenging for the judge to actually put any weight on that expert's opinion. That said, sometimes tiles get replaced for all sorts of reasons and you can't get the exact tile. But anyway, I think in this case, they thought that the court shouldn't impose a standard of perfection on the defendant Royal Bank because someone slept on a wet footprint. That just didn't, I don't think, sat well with the judge. So those are the three cases that I think were the most recent and most relevant anyway, to give you a sense of how dynamic coefficient of friction is used, how it's not used, and what type of factors the court's going to consider when they're dealing with these types of claims. I was involved in another claim where tiles were certainly an aspect of the claim. Now, if you can see here, the picture on the left is that sheer wall on the right with the lights at the bottom. That's a waterfall. It's a 3-story waterfall. So there's a pool up above, and then the water was intended to fall over the side and then land in that catch basin at the bottom, where it would be circulated back up to the pond at the bottom. What happened? There's a number of issues happened, but as you can see, it's not operational. The picture on the right shows a couple tiles that have been replaced or ripped right off because there's water ingress in behind the tiles. It got into the drywall, and the strata just hasn't replaced it. It ended up being an issue in the claim. There was also a bit of a hazard because the water would fall down this wall, and then it would splash all over the place, and it would splash right onto that floor, which caused a bit of a hazard for the owners or occupiers of the strata building. I'll show you some more pictures. This is the picture on the right is the top of that pool. There's a glass that separated an outdoor area, and then there's an indoor area. And so the water would go from here and then fall over this precast weir, and then fall down the wall. One of the issues ultimately was that the wall just wasn't designed properly, I don't think, and that the catch basin was too small. So it was too steep, there wasn't enough slope to the wall, and then the water would just fall over the weir and just splash everywhere. So remediating it was a big challenge. A couple people took shots at trying to remediate it. And as I'll show you in a minute, this is kind of the solution they tried to come up with. So one was replacing this weir. Another one was replacing the tiles. And so here they had 6 by 36 slate tiles. And then another one was replacing the tiles so they would butt up against each other. They tried different tiles that had more of a groove in them, so that water would hopefully adhere to the tiles and stick to the wall as opposed to splashing off. Here's another design drawing that they came up with, where there's the bullnose weir and then the tile and how they're supposed to overlap, and what type of tile. So this obviously was done by an architect in this case, but you can see what they're putting into these to try and come up with a solution. But ultimately, I think I would, if it were me, if I were an architect, I would rely quite heavily on those who have experience in the industry and try and come up with a solution. So what would work for this type of project? Would you need something with a higher DCOF or not? Would DCOF even be relevant? What other specifications would you want to consider when a client comes to you and says, we've got this thing, it's failed a couple times, this big waterfall, help us out. It would be useful to know what the design drawings look like and what they are intending to do and what the problems were previously, to provide them with a good value add. I'm just noting the time. There's probably about 15 minutes left, so I'll probably only spend another 5 minutes, and then we can either open up for questions or comments. But some other legal issues that I've seen, change orders seem to be a problem all the time, and I won't waste your time with my gripes about supply chain issues right now, but I'm sure those are creeping up on everyone in the industry as well too. But change orders, they happen for a number of reasons. One is design isn't really matching, boots on the ground construction, and so they need to change things as they're working through things. And other times, as I'll show you in a minute, the design occurs months, if not a year or two before construction even starts. And so sometimes a question arises as to whether those products would even be available. Have they changed? Are they no longer in this color? I'm sure that's something that you encounter all the time, and trying to deal with those on the fly would probably be a real headache. But I think what's important is if there is a change order, someone, usually the architect or engineer, needs to ensure that the replacement, whatever you're replacing the tile with, still needs to be appropriate for that particular application. I suppose that's where, if it were me, I'd probably be leaning on everyone in the industry as experts, and see what a suitable replacement would be. I don't know if this is more common lately with the pandemic and supply chain issues. I would speculate that it is. And this is where I maybe will gripe about my supply chain issues. I'm waiting for an oven, and it's taken nearly 10 months. So here's an example of this is, I believe, the interior pond and the tile and waterproofing assembly for the whole project. And so this is what they originally specified, was this full waterproof assembly. They actually identified the tile, and I think here they say where you can get it from. So obviously the architect had done some research as to what tile would be suitable and how to get it. Unfortunately, things changed, and they need to render a change order. And so they deleted the originally specified 12 by 12 tile and then added in that new Mustang slate tile. And it was just because it was, they say here, which we've now been informed is now too late to order and maintain construction schedules. So I suppose these things come up, and you need to be able to adapt to them quickly and find a suitable solution. And again, here it says suppliers confirm that shipment container is due for delivery beginning of August, and that it'll be available, and they should secure it immediately. the final thing, I think this is the final thing, is exteriors of buildings. We've talked about slip and falls and tiles on the floor. Talked about interior tiles on walls and water features. I suppose there's some buildings, probably less and less these days because it's very expensive. And I guess glass is a real thing now. But building envelopes. I was just cruising the TTMAC website and I saw that there's just down the road from me, I think it's the Bill Reed Gallery and Cathedral Office. And I think it's tile on the outside. And I think you need to consider at least that the building envelope doesn't, the first layer of defense is probably that tile and grout system. And then behind that, what you'd have to make sure that water isn't getting in. These are, I mean, we in BC anyway, we encountered a lot of these claims over the years. We've defined them as what we call leaky condo claims. And it's challenging because we have obviously a lot of moisture here. It's another sunny up here, but down on the streets it's quite gray and gloomy. And so there's lots of water, lots of precipitation. It gets in behind some of these exterior surfaces and then into structural problems. And it's just a huge mess. Costs a lot for the owners, insurance companies, legal expenses and things like that. So I just raised it as something that I saw as coming up possibly, or maybe it's coming down in terms of use, given how much or little tiles being used on exterior buildings. That's it. I'm out of time. I'll answer, I'll stop sharing my screen. And I will respond. I'm just going to copy these questions and then see if I can answer them. But
I do have a direct question that was sent to me. And the question is, as a contractor, is the contractor liable for a claim if they have installed the specified tile?
yeah, I think the short answer is no, but it depends. I think so. This came up in the claim that Owen was helping us with, this poor lady who broke her arm, and their position. The contractor got named, or actually there's a subcontractor, I think is the company who installed the tile. And their position was no, they're not responsible because that tile's been specified. They're following directions and they're putting it in. If there's any issues with how it was installed, perhaps if it should have been, it was specified to be installed at a certain pattern or configuration, if it has grooves on it and it went the opposite way for whatever reason against the specifications, then yeah, I think there would be more of an argument to be made that the contractor should have some responsibility for that. But in general, I think if you follow the directions that are given to you, probably not.
Great. Another question I got was for the Tondat versus the Bay case, what were the amounts involved? Just a ballpark.
That was the first one, I believe.
Yeah.
It was actually, I think that's the only one where the plaintiff was successful, and it was $100,000.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
And then in the general chat, there's this question about D and S DCOF values are done on new tiles. Once those tiles have weathered and worn and aged, they may lose some of those values. How is this taken into account when there's a lawsuit on a project that's 6 years old?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, there's multiple ways that I suppose it would get assessed. But I think the initial starting point would be looking at the specifications, seeing what the DCOF is, and then basing that on whether it was suitable at the time. I suppose wear and tear is something that should be considered in those things, but that may be where the on-site testing, that bot 3000 could come in handy, and you can test what the actual S and DCOF measurements might be at the time or shortly after. Timing is always a problem, and in all these cases it's incredibly challenging to assess things at the exact same time that the injury happened. So yeah, you can have someone who let's say the construction started, someone slipped on it 2 years later, they start their claim a year later. By the time you get to the point where you're retaining experts and actually investigating this, it could be 4 years after the person has slipped and fallen. So it's really hard to actually assess that with any accuracy. But I'd be curious to know how much tiles wear and whether manufacturers take that into consideration, or whether they should, and let people know that, hey, this tile wears at a certain rate over, X amount of years.
Great, and this one's for you, Dale. Where are the standards found and by what authority are they determined?
Okay, basically the standard that's being used now, and it just got revised, is through ANSI, and it's governed by, well, I shouldn't say governed, but the association that is behind the revisions and kind of is the guardian of the coefficient of friction testing in North America is Tile Council of North, like I said, Tile Council of North America, and they've just revised the ANSI standard A326.3. So it's not new, it's just that it's been revised, and for the better part, because for most of you, you probably know that when the standard first came out, it was in both ANSI 137.1, and then it had a standalone, which is what ANSI 326.3 is. And why they have a standalone is because it's for all hard surfaces. It's not just for tile. You can use this test method and the standard for terrazzo. You can use it for vinyl tile. You can use it for, they're trying to make it so that it can be used for any type of hard surface, not just strictly for ceramic tile. It is about to be released this next week on Wednesday. They're having a press conference at Surfaces or TISE, and then it will be available. And I just sent you a copy, Lisa, so you've got everybody who wants to have a copy before it's finally published. Nothing's changing. It's just the pre-published draft, but it will be available free of charge on the TCNA website once it's been gone to print. So you'll get the electronic version from them, or you can buy the paper version or the printed version from them but it's going to be free for the digital version, at least for probably, I would say probably 6 months or so.
Thank you, Dale. As another question I've got here, as an architect, our reference standard is the building code, and for pools and commercial kitchens, the local health department. Are you aware, or do you know where the DCOF and COFs are defined or referenced? That's you probably, Dale.
To be honest, I don't think it's referring this yet. I think that's probably something we're going to have to tackle as TTMAC to go to the building code. They've had to, I guess because of COVID, they've not put out the new release. I think they were scheduling for 2020, 2021. I was just on their website recently, and all they've got is some addendums, but they haven't published the new code yet. But we do recognize it in the 093,000 manual, and that's typically where they should be going for the ultimate authority on what is acceptable for floor construction. I don't think you need to worry about DCOF on walls, but for floor construction with tile, and we do recognize the German ramp test as well. But to be honest, there's only one place in all of North America you can get it done, Tile Council of North America. And the only way I would really use the German ramp test is when you've got something that's really difficult to test with the BOT 3000, meaning if you've got very small mosaics, you may want to go with the German ramp test because the grout joints will really disturb the accuracy of the BOT 3000E. Or if you've got a very heavily textured tile, like a slate or something, same thing. I would probably go then to the German ramp test. Or, I'm where Schluter I was just down at Tile Council. I saw the ramp test. It's a funny looking thing. I tell you, I'm really surprised that it's it's actually being used to the extent it is. But anyways, they've been around for a while. I'm using it to test profiles, to test stair nosings. Tile stair nosing should also be tested that way. Tactile strips. You know, if you got a ramp or if you got stairs, a lot of times there's tactile strips being used. You might want to use that ramp for that type of situation. So.
There was one other question. This one's for you, Jackson. Where did the DCOF standards come from that were presented?
That's a good question. I probably should have footnoted that. I don't know off the top of my head.
You want me to answer that? I can probably tell you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I also sit on ISO, and the TC 189 for ISO. We've been fighting over this for a long time, and the German ramp test, the BOT 3000E, are probably going to be part of the ISO standard. And then you got the pendulum. The pendulum is actually kind of a British Commonwealth test method that the Brits love a lot. The European, New Zealand, Australia love it. The problem with the pendulum is that it can be manipulated very easily. The operator can change the way the pendulum comes down so that you can almost ask them to get you whatever number you want. So it's a lot of countries won't touch it, don't like it. So that's, and then you got the old test method, the ASTM C1028, which was a static test. And that's why I'm confused, Jackson, is with that last case you had, it was in 2008. So that was prior to DCOF as far as the bot and all that goes. So I'm wondering if they use the pendulum. And if they use the pendulum, again, it's a very controversial test method. Funny enough, even though they got the German ramp test, the German representative for ISO still thinks the pendulum should be part of the ISO standard too. The site, 4 different types of test methods. But that's where most of them, the one that confused me, and I'm going to have to look that one up, is the DIN 51097 ABC. Obviously it's a German test method. I'm not familiar with it. Maybe somebody else is from our group here, but that's a new one for me.
Great. And that is all the questions that I have that I can see. So thank you, everyone.
Can I maybe just make a couple quick points just so that there's no misunderstanding? And and I know I understand, Jackson, you're not an expert on this, so it's not not trying to judge your competence on the subject.
Not at all. I need the help.
Yeah. So the new test method, the number that they're using for exterior wet is 0.55, not 0.00 or greater. And you also made a comment that the higher the greater, and that's kind of true. The only thing is there is a magical number where it's too much. It could be a tripping hazard. So you don't want to get much higher than probably 0.65. I think once you start getting above that, you're probably going to find people are going to stick and trip. Like I mentioned, the tactile strips. You can't really use the bot to test it, but if they were too high, the first ones that came out a long time ago by one of the tile manufacturers were so large that people were tripping and falling into the subway. And so they obviously had to reduce the size of the tactile dome so that they wouldn't have such a high coefficient of friction. But so that was one thing. And the other aspect was the question about tile wearing out. That's a very viable concern, because in some cases, some tile actually have like a sacrificial surface on it that is made to wear off immediately, within traffic, to protect it when it's being shipped and things of that nature. And it's supposed to be taken into the calculation so that it still gives you the calculation that you want as far as DCOF. And the numbers have been upgraded so that when you do have these challenging applications, it used to be the old version of the 137.1 and 326.3. Everything goes on 0.42. Either if it was dry, it could be almost any number. But if it's a wet area, then it had to be 0.42 or higher, but no guidance whatsoever. So the big improvement now is that they've broken it down into interior wet plus, which has gone from a 0.42 to a 0.5. Exterior wet is 0.55. And now they did have ramps in that, but they decided to change that the last revision. And so now they got it as oil and greases. So obviously that's kitchens and high commercial applications. And they've also given a 0.55. And for those last three classifications, they're actually calling it the alternative to this. This is what they're recommending is manufacturer declared product use. So in other words, like one of the sheets that you sent showed of a manufacturer's lack of testing in that first one, but they did say where it could be used. That's manufacturer declared usage. But just to back yourself up, you've now got these extra numbers that Tile Council has identified with tons of testing. And I would always recommend that if they're just going to, the manufacturer of the tile just says, well, it's good for a kitchen. Oh yeah, well, what is your DCOF? What is your real number on that? And are you willing to stand up behind it? I did an exterior application where it was 0.5, not 0.55, with a porcelain, gauge porcelain tile, 1 meter by 3 meter. And the manufacturer guaranteed it was fine for that wet area outside with snow and salt and everything else.
Perfect. I had another question for Dale. Who is they in this discussion? Who is making the classifications?
The classifications is done by a committee. It's an ANSI committee under ANSI A108. I'm on that committee representing Canada for the TTMAC and also Standards Council of Canada. We meet twice a year. We have a meeting coming up in Las Vegas, not this show, but the next show, which is Coverings in April. And we also ballot or send drafts and ballot online. So that's who they is. It's ANSI A108, and it's a pretty big group. We probably got about 50 different representatives. If you have an ANSI A108 book, you'll see the list of members on there, and it's a cross selection of everybody from the industry, including some architects, including some consultants and what have you.
Great. And I have one last question for you, Dale. Did you state that the quote unquote happy zone is between 0.45 and 0.65 for DCOF?
No. What was for what was the last part of that?
It just says for DCOF. Maybe.
Oh, for DCOF.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be just strictly anything when got wet had to be at least 0.42 or higher, and they never really qualified that. And to be quite honest, I spent hours in a show in Italy with one of our distributors from Halifax, who was adamant that they had to have different numbers. And I guess it finally rung true. I was with Eric Astracan and Bill Greasy of Tile Council, and for literally 2 hours, we sat in our meeting room and argued over it. And finally, they did come up with these extra numbers, which only makes sense. Why would a ramp be okay at 0.42 or higher where you have a flat surface but it only gets occasionally wet? Obviously, there should be a higher number. So this is why we have the extra numbers. But right now, the threshold seems to be between 0.42 to 0.55. Great.
I'm going to let Craig do the closing remarks.
Yeah, yeah, this probably could go on for another hour with the amount of details that are here, but we have to cut it. We're over our time now. So thank you, everybody. And Barb, thank you for gathering everybody together. And I think everybody can have a good day, but the committee, can you please stay on for evaluation?
Yep.
Just one point, I also wanted to say a big thank you to Owen. I forgot to thank him earlier for his wonderful relationship with Jackson, and Jackson for your time and input in this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, good evening, everybody.
Thank you, Jackson.
Oh, my pleasure, anytime.
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you, bye. See you guys.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
No problem.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Salut.
Thank you.
All right. So I don't think we'll get in trouble. Jackson, you had some proprietary things in the screen, in the detail. I don't think we'll get in trouble for it because you're
Have you
not
cut those out?
representing a competitive company, but because there was, things like the Mapei brand was there and whatnot. But if somebody from another company that's within our industry had done that, then an architect would have been jumping on that quickly. Lisa, are you able to clear out some of the folks that are on here?
I can try.
Hey, Jackson, this is Owen here.
Oh,
Oh, I think
COVID Owen.
Is Jackson gone?
he's gone now.
Oh,
good.
yeah, he's not on.
Okay. No, he did a great job today, though. I agree with you, Craig. I don't think the way he did it, we shouldn't hear about that. That was very simple the way he proceeded through those different proprietary brands and stuff. I don't see any backlash with that.
We still have 16 people listening on, so
I'm working.
Are you're getting rid of them, Lisa?
I'm putting them in the waiting room slowly.
well, you can obviously leave the board members.
Yeah, I was just about to put Todd.
Yeah, block Todd.
Nobody puts baby in the corner.
So we have a successful tech talk, but the huge problem we had was our limit is at 100 and we have 150 people wanting to get in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that the Violetta's looked into that. It's an annual bill of $804.